My name is Roy Patterson, and what I'm about to tell you was never meant to leave the boardroom. Lean in, because this story doesn't start with revenge. It starts with a mistake so arrogant it detonated an empire. For 16 years, I didn't take a single real holiday, not one. I didn't miss birthdays, dinners, or sleep because I loved the work. I did it because I understood something most men learn too late. In corporate life, indispensability is power. Quiet power. The kind that keeps the lights on while others take credit. The kind that makes million-dollar machines obey without ever knowing your name. That afternoon, I was sitting at a vineyard in Napa Valley. Sun low, glass of Cabernet untouched. For the first time in over a decade, I wasn't waiting for an emergency call. I wasn't bracing for a production line failure. I wasn't fixing the consequences of someone else's MBA experiment. I was just present, and that's when my phone buzzed. Glenn Harper, my boss, the kind of man who wears authority like a costume and believes fear is leadership. His voice didn't ask a question, it accused. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Taking vacation during audit prep?" I told him the truth. My leave was approved 3 weeks ago. Silence. Then the sentence that changes lives when spoken by the wrong man at the wrong time. "We don't approve laziness. You're terminated, effective immediately." Here's the part they never teach you about power. When it's real, you feel calm when it's tested. The world didn't collapse. My chest didn't tighten. I felt relief. Because in that moment, Glenn revealed something fatal. He thought I was replaceable. Men like Glenn believe titles are power. They believe systems run on org charts. They believe loyalty is weakness and sacrifice is free. And they only learn the truth when the machinery they've abused finally stops responding. I ended the call, lifted my glass. And across the table sat a man who didn't flinch because he already knew who I was. What Glenn did that day wasn't punishment, it was permission. And once you understand what permission really means in the corporate world, you can never unsee it. The man across from me didn't rush to fill the silence. That's how I knew he was dangerous in the rarest way. Power doesn't interrupt, it observes. He wore no logo, no badge, no performative confidence, just presence. The kind that settles into a room and quietly rearranges the hierarchy without asking permission. He introduced himself as Vincent Cross like it was nothing. And maybe to most people it would have been. But here's a truth most men never hear. The real decision makers don't announce themselves. They listen. They wait. And when you speak, they're measuring not your words but your weight. I told him I'd just been fired, not with anger, not with self-pity, just fact. The way you report a storm already passed. He didn't offer sympathy. He didn't say that's rough or you'll land on your feet. He smiled, not warmly but knowingly, and raised his glass. "Then it's about time," he said, "that the right people noticed you." That sentence landed harder than the termination call, because recognition, real recognition, is rare in corporate life. Most men spend decades being essential but unseen. You're rewarded with more work, not more authority. You become the backbone, then the scapegoat. The system feeds on men like that. Quiet, reliable, replaceable in theory, irreplaceable in practice. Vincent wasn't guessing, he knew. He spoke about my company's recent losses, about contracts bleeding out, about manufacturing delays everyone blamed on market conditions. He said one line that should terrify every executive watching this. "Your company survives despite its leadership, not because of it." That's when I understood who I was dining with. Not a consultant, not a retiree, an owner. The kind that doesn't run companies day to day because he owns the consequences when they fail. He knew the industry, he knew the weak points, and somehow he knew me. For years I thought staying invisible kept me safe. No politics, no enemies, just results. But invisibility has a cost. When credit never finds you, blame eventually does. Vincent leaned back and studied me the way a chess player studies a piece they didn't expect to still be on the board. "You know what your boss just did?" he asked. I shook my head. "He confused obedience with loyalty," Vincent said, "and loyalty with ownership." That's the moment the vineyard disappeared. Because once you understand that corporations don't run on effort, but on leverage. You stop asking for fairness, and you start preparing for consequences. Before I could answer Vincent, a voice cut through the afternoon air like a knife through silk. "Vincent, I didn't expect to see you here." Diana Wells, manufacturing consultant, the kind of woman who walks into failing plants and walks out with truth no one wanted to hear. I'd worked with her on emergency projects, the ones executives deny exist until the losses can't be hidden anymore. She stopped mid-step when she saw me. Then she saw my phone. Then her expression changed. "He fired you," she said flatly, not a question, an indictment. "During audit prep week." That was the moment something shifted, because when professionals stop pretending and start speaking plainly, you know the situation is already beyond recovery. "Does he even understand what he's done?" she asked Vincent. Vincent didn't answer right away. He watched me instead, measuring how I carried the truth. Measuring whether I still thought like an employee or had finally crossed the line into something more dangerous. "Glenn understands titles," Vincent said finally. "He doesn't understand systems." Diana crossed her arms. "Half their safety infrastructure depends on Roy's architecture, not documentation, judgment, instinct, years of calibration. Here, what most men inside corporations don't realize until it's too late. Companies don't collapse when people leave. They collapse when knowledge walks out unchallenged, when experience stops compensating for incompetence. I'd spent 16 years quietly preventing disasters no one ever saw, not because I wanted praise, but because I understood the cost of failure. Glenn never did. He saw clean dashboards and green indicators and thought they were permanent. They weren't indicators, they were me. Diana turned to me. "Your phone's going to explode tonight." I nodded. Already felt it, the tremor before the quake. Vincent smiled, but there was no humor in it. "The interesting part isn't that he fired you," he said. "It's that he did it publicly." That's when it hit me. In corporate life, mistakes are survivable. Humiliation is not. Glenn hadn't just removed me, he declared me disposable, and now every failure that followed would need a villain. "You're about to be blamed," Diana said quietly. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I'd spent too many years fixing problems to waste energy denying them. Instead, I felt something unfamiliar: space. For the first time in my adult life, their emergency wasn't my responsibility. Their panic wasn't my burden. Their collapse wasn't my fault. Vincent raised his glass one last time. "Welcome to the other side," he said. And that's when my phone started buzzing like a warning siren, confirming what every man watching this needs to understand. The moment you step away, the truth rushes in. By the time I reached my hotel room, the illusion was already collapsing. 31 missed calls, 8 voicemails, emails stacked so high they blurred into noise. The same system that ignored me for 16 years was suddenly screaming my name like it had always known my value. This is how corporate panic sounds when the mask comes off. The first message I opened was from Lance Fisher, one of the few men inside TechFlow who understood how fragile the operation really was. His words weren't polished, they were raw. "Please tell me Glenn didn't actually fire you. Audit prep is falling apart. Rodriguez tried to run your safety sequence and crashed the monitoring system. 3 clients are asking for you by name." By name. That's when you realize something important. Power doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself in absence. Another message followed immediately. "Glenn told everyone you abandoned your responsibilities. Nobody's buying it." Of course he did. Men like Glenn always rewrite reality when control slips. They don't ask why things failed. They decide who to blame. I sat on the edge of the bed and let 16 years settle in, not as exhaustion but as clarity. TechFlow hadn't been strong because of leadership. It had been stable because I absorbed chaos quietly. I'd been the buffer between arrogance and reality, and buffers are invisible until they're gone. HR called next. The voice was rehearsed, stiff, wrapped in policy language meant to sound authoritative. "Return company assets, non-compete review, confidentiality obligations." Translation: Glenn was panicking and reaching for bureaucracy like a shield. But here's a truth they never teach you. Policies don't run companies, people do. And policies collapse when the people who understand the system stop enforcing them. I set the phone down, and for the first time in over a decade, I didn't rush to fix anything. A knock came at the door. Diana stood there with 2 coffees and a look that said the industry already knew. She stepped inside without waiting for permission. "Words moving fast," she said. "Consultants are talking, clients are talking, and Vincent mentioned your name to people who don't forget favors." That's when I understood the real shift. I wasn't being hunted, I was being evaluated. "You've been carrying that company on your back for years," Diana said. "Everyone knows it except the man who thought fear was leadership." She met my eyes. "You're free now. The question is, what are you going to build?" And in that moment I realized something every man eventually must face. Staying loyal to a broken system doesn't make you strong. Knowing when to walk away does. The next morning, the sky over California was calm in a way that felt insulting. Blue, clear, indifferent. The kind of day that doesn't care if a corporate empire is bleeding out behind the scenes. I connected to airport Wi-Fi and the illusion finally shattered completely. Internal emails, dozens of them, accidentally forwarded, desperately copied, written by people who had no idea I was already gone but felt the vacuum I left behind. The safety compliance check is failing. Error codes we don't recognize. That's because Roy customized half the architecture 3 years ago. No one else knows how to recalibrate it. Clients are escalating. They're asking specific questions we can't answer. Then the line that told me everything I needed to know about Glenn Harper. "Find Roy's documentation. Nobody is irreplaceable." I almost laughed. Men like Glenn believe experience can be downloaded. That intuition can be transferred. That judgment earned through crisis can be summarized in a PDF and handed to someone cheaper. But systems don't fail on paper. They fail at 3:00 a.m. when alarms contradict each other, when machines behave in ways they were never designed to, when the only thing standing between catastrophe and continuity is pattern recognition built through suffering. You don't replace that. You disrespect it until it's gone. Another message came through, this one private, from Lance again. He's blaming you, telling leadership you sabotaged things before leaving. People are pushing back, but it's getting ugly. There it was. The final move of the incompetent leader. When results disappear, they attack character. I felt no anger, no panic, just confirmation. Glenn wasn't trying to save the company. He was trying to save himself. And that distinction matters because it determines who survives what comes next. At 35,000 feet, watching clouds drift beneath the wing, something settled inside me. I wasn't returning as the man who cleaned up messes quietly. I was returning as a variable they couldn't control. When we landed, my phone rang again. Unknown number, I answered. "Roy, this is Kevin Rodriguez." His voice was tight, controlled panic. Kevin was the man Glenn had promoted to fill my role, competent but unprepared. A good soldier thrown into a war he didn't understand. "I don't know what to do," he admitted. "The monitoring system keeps failing. Clients want emergency meetings. Glenn keeps saying you'll come back." That last sentence told me everything. Come back. As if 16 years of sacrifice could be erased with a command. As if obedience was ownership. I closed my eyes. "Kevin," I said calmly, "what you're dealing with isn't your fault." And as I spoke, I understood the final truth of corporate power. The most dangerous man in the room is the one who no longer needs to return. There was a long silence on the line after I spoke to Kevin. Not the kind filled with relief, but the kind where reality finally arrives, heavy and unavoidable. "Glenn says you're under a non-compete," Kevin said carefully. "That you can't talk to anyone, that if you help you'll be destroyed legally." I almost smiled. This is one of the oldest lies in corporate mythology. Non-competes aren't weapons, they're scarecrows. They exist to intimidate men who don't understand their own leverage. They work only when fear is stronger than clarity. "Kevin," I said, "listen to me closely. A company that can't operate without one person doesn't own that person. It exposes itself through them. He didn't respond right away. "I can't tell you what to do," I continued. "But I can tell you this. Glenn didn't promote you because he trusted you. He promoted you because he needed someone to absorb the impact." That's when his voice cracked, not emotionally, but structurally, like a man realizing he'd been placed between the hammer and the anvil. After we hung up, I stood still in the terminal and watched people rush past me. Executives, assistants, travelers glued to phones, all moving like the system required them to. And that's when the deeper truth surfaced. Corporate life doesn't reward competence, it consumes it. The most valuable men are rarely protected. They're exploited until exhaustion, then blamed when the system finally breaks. Titles go to performers. Power goes to those who control dependency. Glenn never built redundancy. He never invested in understanding. He ruled through urgency, not stability. And urgency always demands a sacrifice. This time the sacrifice refused. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't panic, it was opportunity, a message from Vincent. "Landing in San Francisco tonight, dinner. There are people who want to meet you." No promises, no job offer, just interest. And interest at that level is everything. Here's what men don't realize until they step outside the system. The corporate world is smaller than it looks. Everyone important already knows who carries real weight. They just wait for moments like this when truth forces itself into the open. That evening, sitting across from men who owned factories instead of managing them, I didn't sell myself. I didn't pitch. I didn't explain. I answered questions calmly, precisely, without urgency, and I watched their expressions change. Because the moment they realized Glenn had fired the one man holding his operation together, something irreversible happened. They didn't see a terminated employee. They saw a pressure point. And once you see where pressure truly lives, you understand how empires are quietly rearranged without a single shot fired. There's a moment, right before a system collapses, when the people at the top still believe they're in control. That's the most dangerous moment of all. Because confidence lingers after competence has already left the room. That week, Glenn called an emergency leadership meeting. I wasn't there, of course, but the aftermath traveled fast. Executives demanding answers, clients requesting names instead of reassurances. Lawyers suddenly present in conversations that used to be casual. And Glenn did what weak leaders always do when pressure rises. He doubled down on authority. He sent a company-wide message stating that all operational issues were temporary disruptions and that leadership had everything under control. He reminded everyone about loyalty, about professionalism, about consequences. Here's the irony: the more leaders talk about control, the less of it they have. Behind closed doors, production lines were stalling. Safety certifications were being questioned. Clients weren't asking if TechFlow could fix the problem. They were asking who else could. That's when Vincent called me again. "They're circling," he said. "Competitors, buyers, partners who smell blood." He paused. "And they're asking one question." I already knew the answer. "Can Roy stabilize operations?" Not TechFlow, not Glenn, me. This is the part of the story most men never get to witness. The invisible marketplace beneath corporate theater, where companies aren't respected for branding, but for continuity. Where ownership changes hands not because of ambition, but because of incompetence. Vincent leaned in across the table. "You don't need revenge," he said. "The system is already doing it for you." And that's when I understood the real nature of corporate revenge. It isn't loud. It isn't emotional. It doesn't need confrontation. It's absence. It's watching men who ignored you now speak your name in rooms you were never invited into. It's seeing value transfer quietly, legally, inevitably, away from those who mistook control for power. Now listen to me carefully, because this is where the story stops being about me and starts being about you. If you've ever been the man holding things together while others took credit, if you've ever been punished for rest after years of sacrifice, if you've ever felt invisible despite being essential, I want you to do something right now. In the comments, type this phrase twice. I am not replaceable. Again, I am not replaceable. Not for the algorithm, for yourself. Because the moment you internalize that truth, your behavior changes, your posture changes, the way people treat you changes whether they understand why or not. Glenn never understood who he fired, but by the time he realized, the boardroom was already shifting without him. By the time Glenn realized the ground was moving beneath his feet, it was already too late to run. Emergency meetings turned into closed-door sessions. Closed-door sessions turned into legal consultations, and legal consultations are where the truth finally drops the mask. Not morality, not loyalty, risk. The board wasn't asking how Glenn felt. They were asking how exposed they were. Every unanswered client call tightened the noose. Every delayed audit response chipped away at credibility. And every sentence that began with "Roy used to handle that" carved my absence deeper into the room. This is how power actually shifts in corporate life. Not through rebellion, but through realization. One board member asked the question Glenn had been avoiding since the vineyard. Can we get Roy back? Silence. Another asked, colder. What happens if we can't? That's when Glenn lost control of the narrative. Because when leadership has to ask whether one man can be replaced, the answer has already been given. The only thing left is deciding who pays the price. Vincent called me that night. His tone wasn't celebratory, it was surgical. They're discussing asset divestment, he said. Plants, contracts, pieces of the company being carved off to contain the damage. I stared out the window, city lights blurred by distance. And Glenn? I asked. Vincent paused. He's becoming negotiable. That word matters, negotiable. In corporate language, it means disposable, but with paperwork. Here's the brutal truth men need to hear. Corporations don't punish incompetence immediately. They tolerate it as long as someone else absorbs the consequences. The moment that buffer disappears, accountability arrives fast and without mercy. Glenn reached out the next morning, not with rage, not with threats, with politeness. Roy, his message began, let's talk. That's how you know the balance of power has shifted. When a man who fired you for resting suddenly wants a conversation. But conversations are for equals. And Glenn had already told me exactly what he thought I was worth. I didn't reply. Instead, I met Vincent and two owners who didn't care about corporate politics. They cared about uptime, safety, stability. They didn't ask for loyalty, they asked for terms. And that's when it became clear Glenn's greatest mistake wasn't firing me. It was teaching me through force what my absence was truly worth. Because once a man understands his market value outside the cage, he never crawls back in. Glenn tried again. This time the message was longer, carefully worded. Stripped of arrogance, it spoke of miscommunication, of pressure, of moving too fast. He suggested a meeting, neutral ground, a chance to reset. Men like Glenn always believe the past can be negotiated once the future is threatened. But here's the truth, respect given under pressure is not respect. It's surrender wearing a smile. While his message sat unanswered, something far more important was happening. Clients were making quiet calls, not to Glenn, not to sales, to people like Vincent. To owners, to men who understood what continuity actually costs. They weren't asking about tech flow. They were asking about me. Could I consult independently? Could I stabilize systems without corporate interference? Could I build something leaner without layers of ego between decision and execution? For 16 years, I'd been told independence was risky. That security lived inside the company. That stepping outside meant instability. Another lie. Security doesn't come from permission. It comes from demand. One executive said something I'll never forget. We don't need a company, we need certainty. That's when the final illusion broke. Corporations sell structure. Men like me deliver certainty. And certainty is always more valuable. Meanwhile, Glenn's world was shrinking. The board wasn't defending him anymore. HR stopped CCing him on certain threads. Legal language started appearing where leadership used to speak. He was being isolated. This is how systems protect themselves. They don't save leaders, they sacrifice them. The day Glenn was asked to step aside temporarily, the announcement framed it as strategic realignment. vision, future focus, but everyone knew what it meant. The man who fired the backbone had become the liability. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel triumph. I felt confirmation, because revenge implies emotion. This wasn't revenge. This was gravity. I walked away from the table not as an employee, not as a manager, not even as a consultant, but as a man who finally understood where power truly lives. And if you're listening closely, you should feel it too. Power doesn't come from loyalty to systems that don't protect you. It comes from mastery that systems can't survive without. Once you see that, you stop asking for time off. You start deciding who deserves your time at all. Glenn's departure didn't make headlines. It never does. Corporate removals are designed to look voluntary, dignified, strategic. A soft exit for a hard failure. But inside the industry, everyone understood what had happened. A man mistook authority for leverage and paid for it. TechFlow limped on for a while, pieces sold off, contracts renegotiated. The name remained, but the spine was gone. That's another truth most men don't want to face. Companies can survive without leaders. They cannot survive without competence. As for me, I didn't win a position. I chose one. I built something smaller, sharper. No org charts bloated with politics. No emergency calls created by ignorance. Just systems designed with respect for reality, not ego. The calls didn't stop. Owners, operators, quiet men with real stakes and real consequences. They didn't want management theory. They wanted someone who had stood between failure and catastrophe and chosen correctly. Every conversation reinforced the same lesson. The most valuable men are never the loudest in the room. They're the calmest when everything breaks. And here's the part that matters for you. If you're inside a system right now that punishes rest, ignores loyalty, and confuses fear with leadership, understand this. You are not trapped. You are being tested. Tested to see how much you'll endure before you remember your worth. Tested to see whether you'll trade years of your life for the illusion of security. Glenn believed I needed the company. The company needed me. That misunderstanding cost him everything. And if this story unsettles you, if it feels like something you weren't supposed to hear, that's because it is. Men aren't taught how power actually works. They're taught how to obey. But once you see the machinery from the outside, once you feel what it's like to step away and watch the system scramble, you don't become reckless. You become deliberate. And deliberate men are the ones the system fears most.